The morning of March 4th, 3019, dawned with the promise of bloodshed and desperation. The Battle of Helm's Deep had raged through the night, and by the first light of day, it was clear that the situation was dire for the defenders of Rohan. King Theoden, the aging but resolute ruler of Rohan, stood atop the walls, his eyes weary but defiant. Beside him was Aragorn, son of Arathorn, one of the few warriors who fought with the fury of a man destined for greater things. They both knew that this battle could mark the end of their people. Saruman's army, a mass of Uruk-hai, half-orcs and wild men, had surged forward with relentless aggression, seeking to annihilate every last defender within the fortress. The Hornburg, the main keep of Helm's Deep, had withstood countless assaults over the centuries, but even its ancient stone walls trembled under the fury of Saruman's onslaught. The defenders, outnumbered many times over, fought with every ounce of strength they had, but their hope was fading. Rain lashed against the walls, and the cries of the wounded mingled with the war chants of the enemy. Inside the deeping wall, men, boys, and even the women of Rohan took up arms, knowing that their backs were against the wall and that there would be no retreat. Then, something changed. As dawn began to break, a light appeared on the ridge to the east. It was faint at first, but it grew stronger, more radiant, and at its heart rode Gandalf the White, mounted upon his faithful steed, Shadowfax. Behind him surged a host of riders, their banners fluttering in the wind. They were Rohirrim, the horse lords of the Westfold, and in that moment they were nothing less than the salvation of Helm's Deep. But the question lingered. Why had they come so late? What had delayed Gandalf's arrival? Why did he appear at the very brink of defeat? As the host charged down the hill, scattering Saruman's army like leaves before a storm, the answers to these questions lay miles away, hidden in the blood-soaked ground of the fords of Isen. This is where our story truly begins, and to understand Gandalf's journey, we must unravel the events that led to this pivotal moment. Greetings, dear friends, and welcome to Middle-earth Tales, where we uncover the stories behind the legends of Tolkien's vast world. I am your host, Dragon, and today we'll be diving deep into one of the most crucial battles in the War of the Ring, the Battle of Helm's Deep, and the true reason behind Gandalf's seemingly late arrival. As we stand upon the brink of battle, we must ask ourselves, who were these riders that accompanied Gandalf? Where had they come from, and why didn't they arrive sooner? Many have wondered why Gandalf, who was known for his wisdom and foresight, did not arrive earlier when Rohan needed him the most. But the reality is far more complex than it appears at first glance. Today, we will piece together the events that transpired before that fateful dawn, unraveling the mysteries surrounding Gandalf's journey and the battles that were fought to ensure Rohan's survival. Through this exploration, we aim to shed light on the battles at the fords of Isen, a critical series of events that altered the course of history and delayed Gandalf's ride to Helm's Deep. So, join me as we delve into the history, the strategy, and the sacrifices that made Gandalf's arrival possible, and let us discover how these battles formed the backbone of Rohan's resilience against the forces of darkness. To fully comprehend why Gandalf was delayed, we must journey west of Helm's Deep, to a place of immense strategic importance, the fords of Isen. This crossing situated along the mighty river Isen, served as a vital gateway into Rohan's lands from the west. The river itself, flowing down from the misty mountains, provided a natural barrier, but the fords were the only feasible point where armies could cross. It was here that the main road ran, connecting Rohan to the lands beyond, to Isengard, and ultimately to the vast plains of Rohan itself. The fords of Isen were more than just a geographical feature. They were a lifeline for the kingdom of Rohan. Whoever controlled the fords controlled the flow of movement and communication between the western regions and the rest of the realm. It was, therefore, the key to defending Rohan from invasion. Throughout history, this crossing had seen countless battles, skirmishes, and power struggles, but none as decisive as the two battles that would occur here in the early days of March 3019. When Theodred, the son of King Theoden, recognized the growing threat posed by Saruman, he understood that the fords would be the first line of defense. Saruman's desire to seize control of this crossing was part of a larger strategy to cut off Rohan from reinforcements and ensure that his forces could march unchallenged into the kingdom's heartlands. It was a classic military move. Sever the lifeline, and the body will wither. To understand why the defense of the fords was so crucial, we must first explore the military structure of Rohan itself. The kingdom was divided into different regions, each responsible for mustering its own forces in times of need. Unlike many other kingdoms of Middle-earth, Rohan had no standing army. Instead, they relied on a system of mustering, calling upon the warriors of each region when danger threatened. At the head of this structure was King Theoden, a wise and experienced leader, though age and treachery had begun to weaken him in recent years. Under Theoden were the marshals of Rohan, men tasked with organizing the kingdom's defenses and leading their respective forces. Theodred, the king's son, was the second marshal and had command of the Westfold, the region that encompassed the fords of Isen. Eomer, Theoden's nephew and third marshal, led the riders of the Eastmark, the largest and most formidable group of horsemen in Rohan. The Rohirrim were known throughout Middle-earth as the greatest horsemen in the land, and their ability to respond swiftly to threats made them a fearsome fighting force. Yet despite their prowess, they were not invincible. Saruman knew this, and he sought to exploit their decentralized military structure, hoping to strike before the riders could fully muster their strength. This is why the fords of Isen became such a critical focal point in the days leading up to the Battle of Helm's Deep. By holding the fords, Rohan could keep its western borders secure and allow reinforcements to flow freely. But if the fords fell, it would open a direct path for Saruman's armies to march upon Edoras, the capital, or strike at Helm's Deep from behind, trapping the defenders in a vice-like grip. Theodred understood this all too well, which is why he took it upon himself to defend this crossing with every available rider he could muster. And it was at this critical juncture that the story of Gandalf's delayed arrival truly begins. The battles fought at the fords of Isen were not mere distractions. They were a desperate struggle that would ultimately determine the fate of Rohan. As we move forward, we'll see how these battles forced Gandalf to alter his plans, gathering reinforcements from across the land, and how each delay and setback brought him closer to arriving just in time to turn the tide at Helm's Deep. Saruman, once the wisest of the Istari and the head of the White Council, had descended into darkness. Through deceit, cunning, and a lust for power, he had set his sights on ruling Rohan as a stepping stone to greater dominance. Saruman understood that Rohan was the linchpin of resistance against Sauron's growing shadow in the west, and he knew that if he could cripple the kingdom, he would not only gain a valuable ally in Sauron, but also secure his own power in Middle-earth. The wizard's intentions were clear: divide and conquer. He sought to exploit Rohan's vulnerabilities, using both force and manipulation to achieve his goals. The first phase of Saruman's strategy was to weaken Rohan from within. He sent spies and agents, most notably Grima Wormtongue, to poison King Theoden's mind with lies and despair. Wormtongue's subtle manipulations eroded Theoden's will to fight, leaving him indecisive, weak, and isolated. Under Wormtongue's influence, Theoden's ability to command his people effectively was diminished, and Rohan's defenses weakened as a result. Saruman knew that if Rohan was to be conquered, it needed to be broken before the battle even began. Beyond subversion, Saruman took a more direct approach by raiding Rohan's western settlements. Orcs, Dunlendings, and even wolves under Saruman's command began attacking villages and farmlands, burning crops, slaughtering livestock, and terrorizing the populace. These skirmishes were meant to spread fear and confusion, to drain the kingdom of its strength before the true assault began. As the pressure mounted, Theodred and Eomer took it upon themselves to organize the kingdom's defenses, rallying what forces they could to repel Saruman's incursions. But even with their bravery, they knew the day was fast approaching when Saruman's full might would descend upon Rohan. It was Theodred, in particular, who realized the strategic importance of the fords of Isen. Understanding that this was the most likely point of attack for Saruman's armies, he took up a defensive position there, hoping to halt the enemy's advance. However, Theodred also knew that their forces were stretched thin and that they could not afford to lose this vital crossing. It was a desperate gamble, one that would soon be put to the test. The first battle of the fords of Isen began with an eerie silence. Theodred had positioned his men along the southern bank, the best defensive position available to him. His force consisted of hardened warriors from the Westfold, as well as some younger riders eager to prove their worth. The day began like any other, with the river flowing gently and birds singing in the trees, but soon scouts reported the approach of Saruman's vanguard. It began as a distant rumble, the sound of countless feet marching in unison, accompanied by the deep-throated roars of war beasts and the metallic clinking of armor. Saruman's army descended on the fords with terrifying speed and ferocity. Theodred, riding out in front of his troops, gave the order to form up and prepare for battle. He knew that they were outnumbered, but he also knew that they had to hold the line or risk losing everything. The Uruk-hai struck first, their brute strength and relentless aggression crashing against the shield wall of the Rohirrim. Theodred fought bravely, his sword flashing in the sunlight as he cut down one enemy after another. For a moment it seemed as though the defenders might hold, but then Saruman's second wave emerged. Warg riders, their fearsome beasts snarling and snapping, charged into the fray, breaking through the lines. The battle descended into chaos. Theodred, realizing that he was being outflanked, ordered a retreat to the center island of the fords. Here he made his last stand, rallying his men around him and cutting down any who dared approach. But Saruman had anticipated this move. A contingent of orcs, led by vicious captains, broke through the defense and surrounded Theodred. In the confusion, an orc struck him down, delivering a mortal blow. Even as he fell, Theodred continued to fight, striking down his attacker before collapsing. Grimbold, one of his most loyal commanders, fought desperately to protect the prince's body, but it was too late. Theodred, heir to the throne of Rohan, lay dead. The loss of their leader sent a rippling of despair through the ranks, but the Rohirrim fought on. Just when it seemed that all hope was lost, a horn sounded in the distance. Helm, a captain of the Eastfold, arrived with fresh reinforcements, driving back Saruman's forces and saving what remained of Theodred's men. Despite this temporary victory, the cost had been great. The death of Theodred left Rohan without an heir, and the morale of the kingdom was shattered. Saruman had not only struck a blow against Rohan's military strength, but also against its spirit. As the survivors of the first battle tended to their wounded and buried their dead, the realization of what lay ahead began to sink in. Rohan was now leaderless, vulnerable, and facing the very real threat of total annihilation. Grimbold and Elfhelm, two of Rohan's remaining commanders, took it upon themselves to organize the defense of the fords, but they knew that Saruman would return. They were right. Just days later, the second battle began. With Theodred gone, Erkenbrand, a seasoned warrior and commander of the Westfold, assumed command of the forces at the fords of Isen. He was a man of great experience, but he faced an impossible situation. The forces available to him were significantly diminished, and he knew that they couldn't withstand another attack of the same scale. Saruman, aware of Rohan's weakened state, sent an even larger force to finish what he had started. This time, he would make sure that no one survived. Erkenbrand was foreseen to leave the fords to gather reinforcements, leaving Grimbold and Elfhelm to organize the defense. The two commanders disagreed on how best to prepare for the attack. Grimbold, a veteran warrior, believed they should fortify their position and hold the line at all costs. Elfhelm, more cautious and mindful of their dwindling numbers, suggested retreating to a more defensible position and using hit-and-run tactics to delay Saruman's advance. With no clear answer, they decided to compromise, setting up a defensive line along the fords, but preparing for a potential withdrawal if the battle turned against them. When Saruman's army struck again, it was with overwhelming force. Orcs, Dunlendings, and Uruk-hai poured across the fords, smashing into the defenders with relentless fury. Despite their courage and determination, the Rohirrim were overwhelmed. Grimbold and Elfhelm fought valiantly, but they were slowly pushed back, their forces splintering under the sheer weight of the enemy assault. By nightfall, it was clear that they could not hold the fords any longer. Realizing the battle was lost, Grimbold ordered a retreat. He and Elfhelm led the surviving riders southward, disappearing into the darkness and evading capture. The fords of Isen had fallen, and with them, Rohan's hopes of holding back Saruman's advance seemed all but extinguished. Yet this retreat was not a sign of cowardice. It was a strategic withdrawal that would ultimately allow Rohan to regroup and fight another day. It was during this period of confusion and retreat that Gandalf made his move. As Saruman's forces consolidated their hold on the fords, Gandalf rode across Rohan's western reaches, gathering what remained of the scattered forces. He met with Erkenbrand, who had rallied the men of the Westfold, and together they formulated a plan. This delay at the fords of Isen, though costly, had bought Gandalf the time he needed to bring these forces together. Without it, there would have been no riders to charge down the slopes at dawn and break the siege of Helm's Deep. The connection between these battles and the arrival of Gandalf at Helm's Deep is undeniable. The fighting at the fords of Isen was not in vain. It was a crucial delaying action that allowed Rohan to muster the strength needed to fight another day. Saruman's obsession with destroying Rohan quickly led him to underestimate the resilience and courage of its people. This mistake would cost him dearly, for while he had managed to kill Theodred and seize the fords, he had failed to deliver a killing blow to Rohan. As Gandalf rode to Helm's Deep with Erkenbrand's men, he knew that the tide was turning. The forces of darkness could be beaten back, but only if they stood together. It was this realization, born out of the bloodshed at the fords of Isen, that allowed him to bring hope to Helm's Deep at the moment when all hope seemed lost. Without the sacrifices made by Theodred, Grimbold, Elfhelm, and countless others, there would have been no dawn charge, no victory, and no turning point in the War of the Ring. Thus, the battles at the fords of Isen, though seemingly lost, were in truth the foundation upon which Rohan's survival was built. They were the reason Gandalf was late, but also the reason he arrived just in time. The battles at the fords of Isen had bought Rohan precious time, but their ultimate significance was much greater than just delaying Saruman's forces. They had forced Gandalf to change his course, and it was this very change that would set in motion the events that would turn the tide of the War of the Ring. As Gandalf rode west, he encountered the survivors of the fords, weary, bloodied, but unbroken. Among them were Erkenbrand and his men, the last remnants of Rohan's defense in the Westfold. Erkenbrand, who had been organizing what forces remained after the battles, knew that their only hope now lay in reuniting with King Theoden and defending the fortress of Helm's Deep. Gandalf recognized that this was not just about one battle. This was about the survival of an entire kingdom. He saw that if Helm's Deep fell, all of Rohan would fall with it, and Saruman would have free rein to join forces with Sauron in the east. But Saruman's strategy of spreading chaos had also fractured his own forces, scattering them across Rohan's western territories. This scattering of troops meant that they weren't able to consolidate a final crushing blow as quickly as Saruman had hoped. Gandalf seized upon this, understanding that there was still a chance to rally enough men to turn the tide. Gandalf set off into the night, moving with an urgency that only Shadowfax could match, racing across the plains to find every able-bodied rider he could. He rallied the scattered men of the Westfold, gathering farmers, young boys, old veterans, anyone who could ride, anyone who could hold a spear. These men were not a standing army, but rather the lifeblood of Rohan itself, rising in defense of their homes and families. They were the same men who had fought at the fords, the same men who had lost brothers and sons in the first and second battles. They knew that this might be their last stand, but they also knew that if they did not ride with Gandalf, there would be no Rohan left to defend. Erkenbrand's role in this was crucial. He commanded respect and loyalty from the men of the Westfold, and it was his presence, alongside Gandalf's rallying cry, that convinced so many to join this desperate final charge. They were not professional soldiers, but they were determined, and they knew their land. Every hill, every valley, every river bend. They had fought Saruman's forces before, and now, under Gandalf's leadership, they would fight them again. with a resolve forged in the fires of defeat and loss. As they rode toward Helm's Deep, the importance of the fords of Isen became even clearer. The delay caused by the battles there had allowed Gandalf the time to assemble these men, to gather the reinforcements that would be necessary to break the siege. Without the resistance at the fords, without Theodred's brave stand and the sacrifice of so many others, Gandalf would have arrived at an empty battlefield, with nothing left to save. But because of the delay, because of the battles fought and lost, there was still a chance, a glimmer of hope, that Helm's Deep might hold. And so, with the dawn fast approaching, Gandalf and the men of the Westfold crested the hill overlooking Helm's Deep. It was a sight that would become legendary. Gandalf, clad in white, bathed in the first rays of the morning sun, leading the riders down the slope with Erkenbrand's banner flying at his side. The defenders within Helm's Deep, exhausted and bloodied, saw the light first, and with it came a surge of hope. The Uruk-hai, who had been moments away from breaking through the final defenses, hesitated. They had been told that there would be no help, that Helm's Deep was isolated, that Rohan was broken. But now, before their very eyes, came the proof that Saruman had lied. Gandalf's arrival changed everything. His charge broke the morale of Saruman's army, who had not anticipated facing a fresh force of Rohirrim. The riders crashed into the enemy lines with all the fury and desperation of men who had nothing left to lose. The Uruk-hai, disciplined and strong, were caught off guard and began to falter. As the light grew brighter and Gandalf's voice rang out, commanding the charge, the tide of the battle turned. The defenders within Helm's Deep rallied, surging forward with renewed strength, and the besiegers found themselves trapped between the riders and the walls of the fortress. What had been moments away from a devastating defeat became a glorious victory. This was the turning point of the war in Rohan. The defeat of Saruman's army at Helm's Deep shattered his plans of conquest. The losses he suffered there crippled his ability to wage further war, and his forces scattered into the hills and forests, hunted down by the Rohirrim and their allies. Rohan, which had seemed on the brink of destruction, had not only survived but emerged stronger, united in purpose and ready to take the fight to their enemies. The impact of Gandalf's arrival at Helm's Deep cannot be overstated. It was more than just a rescue. It was the spark that reignited the fire of hope in a land that had almost lost it. For the first time in many months, Rohan saw a future where they might stand free from the shadow of Isengard. And this victory would echo far beyond the borders of the Riddermark. It showed all of Middle-earth that the forces of darkness could be defeated, that even in the face of overwhelming odds, there was still hope. The movie adaptation of The Two Towers captures the drama and heroism of this moment, but it condenses and simplifies the complex series of events that led to Gandalf's arrival. In Peter Jackson's version, Gandalf's arrival feels almost like a magical solution to a dire problem, a deus ex machina that saves the day in the nick of time. However, the reality, as depicted in Tolkien's writings, is far more intricate and profound. Gandalf's arrival wasn't simply a matter of him showing up at the right moment. It was the culmination of days of brutal fighting, strategic retreats, and the unyielding spirit of the men of Rohan. Every delay, every battle fought at the fords of Isen, every sacrifice made by Theodred and his men had built up to this moment. It was the culmination of Rohan's defiance against the darkness, the proof that their courage and resilience could change the course of history. In the end, Gandalf's arrival at Helm's Deep was not just about saving a fortress, it was about saving hope. It was about showing that even the greatest darkness could be pierced by a single light, that even when all seemed lost, there was still a way forward. The riders that accompanied Gandalf that morning were not faceless reinforcements. They were the sons and fathers of Rohan, the same men who had fought and bled at the fords of Isen. They were the living embodiment of Rohan's spirit, and their charge down that slope was not just an act of war. It was a declaration that Rohan would not fall, that its people would fight for their land, their families, and their future. As we reach the end of this tale, it's important to remember that the battles fought at the fords of Isen, the retreat, the regrouping, and Gandalf's rallying of the Westfold riders were all essential threads in the fabric of this story. Without them, the charge at Helm's Deep would never have happened, and Rohan's story might have ended in darkness and despair. But instead, it became a story of defiance, resilience, and ultimately, victory. And so, we conclude our journey through this chapter of Middle-earth's history. The Battle of Helm's Deep was a triumph, not just because Gandalf arrived in time, but because of the sacrifices made by so many who fought to give him that time. It was a victory born out of loss, a light that emerged from darkness, and a testament to the enduring strength of the human spirit. Thank you for joining me today on this journey into the heart of Rohan's struggles and triumphs. It's tales like these that remind us of the depth and richness of Tolkien's world, where every battle, every loss, and every victory has meaning. If you've enjoyed this deep dive into the lore of Middle-earth, please consider subscribing to Middle-earth Tales and sharing this story with others who seek to understand the true history behind these legendary events. As always, may your path be ever lighted, and may you find courage in the face of your own battles. Farewell until our next adventure together.